ate tough for leaving after my sister-in-law hid my shoes to stop me from going on walks while I was helping with her kids. I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped, and it wasn't when I realized my shoes were missing. It was the second after, when I knew, without proof, without logic, that they hadn't just wandered off. They'd been moved, on purpose. And somehow, that realization felt heavier than it should have, like something small had cracked open and I could suddenly see a much bigger problem behind it. This all started because I thought I was doing a good thing. My sister-in-law Megan has 3 kids under the age of 6. Her husband, my stepbrother, had to leave the country for work for a few months, and she was understandably overwhelmed. When my mom mentioned it in passing, I offered to stay with Megan for a bit to help out. I live across town, not hours away, but far enough that staying over would make mornings and evenings easier for her. She sounded relieved when I brought it up, grateful even. She said yes right away. I packed a bag for a week, figuring we'd play it by ear. I've always been a routine person, not rigid, not obsessive, just anchored. Since October 2018, I've taken a walk every single day. At least a mile, sometimes more. It started during a rough patch in my life when everything felt out of control, and walking was the one thing that made my thoughts quiet down enough to breathe. Over time, it became as normal as brushing my teeth. I don't announce it. I don't make it anyone else's problem. I just go. The first morning at Megan's place, I woke up early, before the kids, before her. I slipped on my sneakers. I left a note on the counter saying I'd be back in 30 minutes and took a 2-mile loop I'd mapped out the night before. When I got back, she was up, pouring coffee. She glanced at her watch and said, "Wow, must be nice to just disappear like that." I laughed awkwardly and said I'd only been gone half an hour. She shrugged. Still, I let it go. The second day, she watched me lace up my shoes and asked, "You really do this every day?" "Yeah," I said. "It helps clear my head." She made a face. Not exactly disapproving, but not curious either. "Even when it's cold?" "Yep." "Even when you're sick?" "Yep." She shook her head like she didn't quite believe me. I could never. Later that afternoon, while the kids were napping or watching a movie, I asked if she wanted me to watch them so she could take a break or get out of the house. And I meant it genuinely. She scoffed, actually scoffed, and said, "I don't have time for that, but again, must be nice." That stung more than I expected. I was there specifically to help. I'd already done laundry, dishes, school pickups, bedtime. I didn't feel like I was slacking, but I brushed it off. Stress makes people weird. I told myself not to take it personally, except the comments didn't stop. By the third day, it felt like every conversation somehow looped back to my walks. "So, it's not really a mile every day, right?" she asked while we were making dinner. "It is," she laughed. "Come on, every single day?" "Yes." "What would you do if you broke your foot?" she pressed. "Would you get anxious if you couldn't go?" I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "I mean, I deal with it." She hummed like she didn't believe me. Sounds kind of obsessive." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. The next morning, I woke up early again. Same routine. Except when I went to grab my shoes by the door, they weren't there. I checked the closet, the living room, under the bench by the entryway. Nothing. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Houses with kids are chaotic. Things get moved. Megan didn't come downstairs for another hour. I was sitting at the table with the kids, helping one with cereal, when she finally wandered in, hair messy, phone in hand. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Have you seen my shoes?" She blinked like she had to think. "Did you check by the back door?" I did. "Check again." I did. Still nothing. When I came back inside, she pointed at the floor by the door like she was revealing a magic trick. "There they are." They were lined up neatly. Too neatly. My chest tightened. "That's not funny," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Relax. It was a joke." I took my walk anyway, but it didn't feel the same. My head wasn't clear. I kept replaying the moment, her tone, the way she hadn't even tried to hide it. When I got back, she was visibly irritated. Arms crossed, jaw tight. "I really think you need to talk to someone," she said out of nowhere. "I do," I replied. "I have a therapist." She snorted. "Then you need a new one because this obsession isn't healthy." That's when I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my throat for days. "Why does this bother you so much?" She stared at me for a long second, then said, "Because you're supposed to be here helping me, knowing you're disappearing every day for hours." "It's 30 minutes," I said quietly. "And I do it when the kids are occupied." She shook her head like I was missing the point, and I felt something shift between us. Not explode, just settle into something colder. That night, I moved my shoes into the guest room with my suitcase. I didn't say anything. I just wanted to avoid another argument. The next morning, they were gone again. I stood there staring at the empty space on the floor longer than I want to admit. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't gasp or sit down or anything like that. I just felt tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. The kind of tired that comes from realizing someone is willing to mess with your head and then tell you you're crazy for reacting. I checked the closet again, even though I already knew. I checked under the bed. I checked the laundry room. Nothing. At that point, it wasn't even about the walk anymore. It was the fact that I deliberately moved my things into a private space and they'd still been touched. Megan was already awake. I could hear her in the kitchen, cabinets opening and closing a little harder than necessary. I picked up my phone and checked the time. If I left right then, I could be home in 20 minutes. I could shower in my own bathroom, drink my own coffee, sit on my own couch. The thought felt like relief and guilt tangled together. I walked into the kitchen and said, "Where are my shoes?" She didn't look up. "I don't know. You're the one who's always losing track of time." "I put them in the guest room," I said. My voice was calm, which almost surprised me. "They weren't by the door. You know they weren't anywhere else. So where are they?" She finally turned around. Her expression was annoyed, but also defensive, like she'd already decided I was attacking her. "Why are you making this such a big deal?" "Because you're hiding my stuff," I said. Saying it out loud made it real. She laughed, short and sharp. "Oh my God, you're being ridiculous." Something in me snapped, not loudly, not explosively, more like a thread finally giving way. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I'm leaving." Her eyebrows shot up. "What?" "I'm going home," I said. I'll still pick up the girls after school today and stay with them until you're back from work, but I'm not staying here. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. You're overreacting. I don't think I am, she scoffed. So you're just going to abandon me? What, because of shoes? I wanted to scream that it wasn't about the shoes, but I didn't. I'd already explained myself so many times, and none of it had mattered. I turned and went upstairs to pack. My hands were shaking a little as I folded my clothes back into my bag. I kept expecting her to follow me, to apologize, to say she'd crossed a line. She didn't. When I carried my bag downstairs, she was on her phone, typing furiously. She didn't look at me. I found my shoes shoved into the coat closet on my way out. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed once, then again. I ignored it until I was parked in my own driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. Then I checked. It was Megan. You're being childish. This is exactly why you're single. I can't believe you do this to me. I stared at the screen, not feeling that familiar urge to explain myself one more time, to make her understand. Instead, I called her. She answered immediately. Are you happy now? She snapped. I told you I'd still help with the kids, I said. I'm not abandoning you. I'm just not staying in a house where my things are messed with. You're so dramatic, she said. I was joking. You take everything so personally. Honestly, this is why you're alone. That one landed. I felt it in my chest, sharp and precise. I'm hanging up now, I said. I'll be there at 3. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Later that day, when I picked up the kids, everything felt normal on the surface. They were excited to see me, talking over each other, asking what we were having for snack. Megan barely acknowledged me when I came in. She moved around the house with exaggerated busyness, sighing loudly, slamming a drawer here and there. At one point, while the kids were in the other room, she leaned toward me and said quietly, I hope you know everyone's going to hear about this. I looked at her. Okay. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Okay? Yes. She huffed and walked away. That night, my mom called. So, she said carefully, Megan told me what happened. I leaned back against my couch, staring at the ceiling. I'm sure she did. She says you left because you didn't want to help anymore. That's not true. She says you're obsessed with walking and refuse to compromise. I closed my eyes. Did she mention hiding my shoes? There was a pause. She said she moved them once as a joke. Twice, I said. Yeah, and after I asked her to stop. Another pause, longer this time. Well, my mom said slowly, you know how stressed she is. I do, I said. That's why I was there. My mom sighed. I just think maybe you could have handled it differently. That familiar guilt crept in, the one that always shows up when family's involved. Maybe I could have stayed. Maybe I could have ignored it. Maybe I should have just skipped a few walks. But then I pictured myself waking up every morning wondering what else would be taken, moved, questioned. I pictured apologizing for existing in a way that didn't inconvenience someone else. I handled it the only way I could, I said. Over the next few days, the story spread. My stepbrother texted me from overseas, confused and upset. Megan posted vague things on Facebook about fake help and finding out who really has your back. A cousin messaged me asking if everything was okay because apparently Megan had told people I stormed out over nothing. I started to doubt myself in the quiet moments. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe daily walks really were weird. Maybe I should have just let it go. But then I'd remember the way she smiled when she told me to check the back door. The way she'd called me broken for wanting 30 minutes to myself. And every morning, when I laced up my shoes in my own hallway and stepped outside, the air felt a little lighter. I didn't feel crazy. I felt like myself. The calm didn't last. By the end of that week, it felt like my phone existed solely to deliver other people's opinions about my character. It wasn't constant buzzing, but it was steady, like a drip you can't ignore once you notice it. My stepbrother texted again, longer this time. He said Megan was barely sleeping, that the kids were acting out, that work was piling up. He said he wasn't taking sides, but he really needed me to understand how hard this was on her. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I typed and erased 3 different responses. I didn't want to defend myself. I didn't want to accuse her. I just said I was still helping with the kids every afternoon like I promised, and that I needed my boundaries respected. He replied with a thumbs up. That somehow felt worse than an argument. The next Monday, my aunt called. She didn't ask how I was. She launched straight into it. You know, she said, when you offer help, people rely on that. I didn't stop helping, I said. Well, she continued, from the way Megan tells it, you made things about yourself. I pressed my lips together. She hid my shoes. There was a pause, then a dismissive little laugh. Oh, honey, that sounds like stress. You know she's not herself right now? I wanted to ask when stress became a free pass to mess with someone else's mental health, but I didn't. I thanked her for calling and hung up, my hand shaking more than I liked. At school pickup that day, Megan was unusually pleasant. Too pleasant. She smiled at me in front of the other parents, chatted about the weather, asked if I'd eaten. For a split second, I wondered if this was her version of an olive branch. Then we got into the car and she said casually, I talked to your mom again. My stomach dropped. Okay. She agrees you should apologize, Megan said, still smiling. Eyeing eyes on the road. Just so you know. For what? For blowing things out of proportion. For leaving me alone when I needed you. I looked out the window. The kids were chattering in the back seat, oblivious. I'm not apologizing for setting a boundary? She laughed, sharp and humorless. God, you always use therapy words to avoid taking responsibility. That one hit deep. I swallowed. I'm taking responsibility for myself. She pulled into the driveway and turned to face me fully. The smile was gone now. Do you know how it looks? You, no kids, no husband, plenty of free time, acting like 30 minutes of walking is more important than family. There it was, the thing she'd been circling for days. I didn't say it was more important, I said quietly. I said it's important to me. She scoffed. Mom, must be nice to have the luxury. I stayed with the kids until she got home from work, like always. We did homework, made grilled cheese, watched a movie. They were happy, normal. When I left, the oldest hugged me a little tighter than usual and asked if I was going to come back tomorrow. I said yes, because I didn't want to lie to her. That night, my mom showed up at my door. She didn't call first. She just knocked, already tense, like she'd been rehearsing. I let her in, made tea, sat across from her at the table like we were negotiating something instead of talking. She's really struggling, my mom said, and now she feels judged. I didn't judge her, I said. I asked her not to hide my shoes. You know what I mean? I rubbed my forehead. Why is everyone so focused on protecting her feelings and not at all concerned about mine? My mom hesitated, because she has more on her plate. That sentence did something to me. I felt it settle into my chest, heavy and familiar. I'd heard versions of it my whole life. Other people's stress always seemed to outweigh my discomfort. Other people's needs always came first, until I quietly disappeared. I'm not asking anyone to choose, I said. I'm asking to not be sabotaged. She didn't sabotage you, my mom said gently. She teased you. I laughed then, a short, bitter sound that surprised both of us. She called me mentally unwell. She hid my belongings. Twice. How far does it have to go before it counts? My mom looked away. You could have stayed and talked it through. I tried. She says you shut down. I stood up, I'm suddenly unable to sit still. I shut down because every time I spoke, she twisted it. My mom watched me pace. I just don't want this to turn into a family rift. I stopped and looked at her. I didn't create this rift. I just refused to let it keep cutting me. She left not long after, unsatisfied. The next escalation came fast. Megan stopped letting me know when she needed help. She texted at the last minute or not at all, then complained to others that I was unreliable. I found out through a cousin that she told people I stormed out because she asked me to pull my weight. Someone else said she'd hinted I was unstable and overly attached to routines. That word, unstable, followed me around like a shadow. One afternoon, after pickup, Megan announced she had an appointment and would be late. She didn't ask. She told. And the kids were already in the car. I agreed because I didn't want to punish them for adult issues. She got home nearly 2 hours later than usual. I really appreciate you staying, she said breezily, taking off her coat. See, compromise isn't so hard. Something inside me went cold. That wasn't a compromise, I said. That was you assuming. She waved a hand. You're flexible when you want to be. I gathered my things. I won't be coming every day anymore. Her head snapped up. Excuse me? I'll help when I can, I said, but this arrangement isn't working. Her face hardened. So you are abandoning us? No, I said. I'm stepping back. She crossed her arms. I'll make sure everyone knows that. As I drove home, my chest felt tight, like I was bracing for impact. I knew this wasn't over. I could feel it. On the way you feel a storm before the sky changes. That night, my phone lit up with a group text I hadn't even known existed. Family members chiming in, offering opinions, asking loaded questions, telling me to be the bigger person. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, and for the first time, I wondered if holding my ground was going to cost me more than I was ready to lose. I didn't respond to the group text that night. I read it, put my phone face down on the coffee table, and sat there in the quiet of my apartment listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant traffic outside. My heart was racing, but my body felt weirdly still, like I was bracing for something I couldn't see yet. The messages kept coming, an uncle saying, families make sacrifices, a cousin posting a heart emoji, and, Neem, hope you two can work it out, someone else adding, this seems like a misunderstanding. No one asked me what actually happened. I went to bed with my phone on silent and still woke up twice convinced I'd missed something important. In the morning, there were more messages. Megan hadn't said anything directly, but I could feel her fingerprints all over the conversation. The phrasing, the emphasis on how alone she was, how help had been promised. I finally typed a response, erased it, typed again. My hands were sweating. I didn't want to sound defensive. I didn't want to sound cold. I just wanted the truth out there. I didn't stop helping, I wrote. I stepped back from staying in the house after my belongings were hidden multiple times, and I was told I was mentally unwell for maintaining a personal routine. Yeah, and I'm still supporting with the kids when I can, but I need my boundaries respected. I stared at it for a full minute before hitting send. The chat went quiet. Not immediately, but slowly, like people reading and deciding whether to touch it. Then my phone buzzed again. Megan, privately. I cannot believe you would say that. I didn't reply. You're making me look abusive. I still didn't reply. You know how this sounds, right? That's when I felt something twist in my gut. Not fear exactly. Something closer to disbelief. She called me. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I declined. Then she texted, if you don't answer, I'm going to have to protect myself. Protect herself? From what? An hour later, my stepbrother called. I answered because part of me still hoped he'd be reasonable. He sounded exhausted. His voice was tight. I felt like he was holding something back. Megan says you're accusing her of emotional abuse, he said. I'm describing what happened, I replied. I didn't use that word. She's terrified, he said. She thinks you're trying to turn the family against her. I laughed, a hollow sound. She already did that? She hid your shoes as a joke, he said. She shouldn't have, but this didn't have to blow up like this. It blew up because she wouldn't stop, I said. And because no one listened when I asked her to. There was a pause. She says you're unstable. There it was again. I felt my face go hot. Based on what? She thinks your walking is compulsive, that you're not as okay as you think. I closed my eyes. I have a therapist. I've had one for years. This isn't a secret. She says that makes it worse. I felt something give way inside me then. A thin, final thread. I'm not having this conversation, I said. I'm not going to defend my mental health to justify basic respect. She's my wife, he said quietly. I know, I said. And I'm your sister. He didn't say anything after that. The call ended shortly after, awkward and unresolved. That afternoon, Megan didn't bring the kids to pick up. She texted me 10 minutes before and said she'd made other arrangements. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. It felt like punishment, like she was testing how much access she could take away. 2 days later, my mom called again. Her voice was strained. Megan is really upset, she said. She feels unsafe around you. I almost dropped the phone. Unsafe? She says you're unpredictable. I laughed, louder this time, sharp and incredulous. Because I take walks? Because you left suddenly? Because you're very rigid. I told her I was leaving. You didn't give her time to adjust. I rubbed my eyes, a headache blooming behind them. Mom, she hid my belongings. She told me I was broken. She told me this is why I'm alone. At what point do I get to say enough? My mom was quiet. She mentioned maybe needing to rethink who's around the kids. My stomach dropped. Is she threatening to keep them from me? She didn't say that exactly, but that's what she means. I just want everyone to calm down, my mom said. Maybe you could apologize for the way you left. For leaving, I repeated. Or for existing in a way she doesn't like. For escalating. I hung up after that. Not angrily, just done. That night, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Megan's friend, someone I'd met once. Hey, I hope it's okay I'm reaching out. Megan is really worried. She feels like you're painting her as controlling, and that could have serious consequences for her family. My hands went cold. What consequences? I typed back. There was a delay. Then, well, people talk, and when someone mentions mental health concerns and kids in the same sentence, I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. It clicked then. This wasn't just about shoes, or walks, or even control in the house. This was about narrative. If I was unstable, then her behavior was justified. If I was unpredictable, then my boundaries were dangerous. If I was obsessive, then hiding my things was concern, not control. I didn't reply. Instead, I emailed my therapist and asked for an emergency appointment. Sitting in that office a few days later, explaining everything out loud, I felt shaky and embarrassed and oddly relieved. My therapist didn't interrupt. She didn't minimize it. When I finished, she said, "This is not about walking." I laughed weakly. "I know. This is about someone trying to manage their anxiety by managing you," she said, "and you refusing to comply." That word, refusing, felt powerful and terrifying at the same time. When I left, I sat in my car and cried for the first time since this started. Not sobbing, just quiet tears, sliding down my face while I stared at the steering wheel. That evening, my phone buzzed again. A new message in the family group chat. Megan had posted, "For the sake of my kids, I'm taking space from people who don't respect our household or my mental health. I hope one day you understand why." The implication hung there, heavy and ugly. I realized then that this wasn't going to resolve quietly, and no matter how calm or reasonable I stayed, someone was going to be painted as the problem, and it probably wasn't going to be her. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that message in my head, the careful wording, the way it sounded so reasonable if you didn't know the context. For the sake of my kids, my mental health. It was the kind of language that shut people up, that made questioning her feel cruel. I could already imagine the nodding heads, the private messages of support she was probably getting. I kept thinking about the kids, about how easily access to them could be used as leverage. Now the next morning, I woke up to an email from my stepbrother. Not a text, an email. That alone made my stomach twist. He wrote that after a lot of thought, he and Megan had decided it was best if I took a break from being involved with the kids for a while, that they needed stability and clear boundaries, that this wasn't a punishment, but a pause. He ended it by saying he hoped I'd use this time to reflect. I read it 3 times. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and laughed, a thin, shaky sound that turned into tears before I could stop it. Reflect. As if I hadn't been doing anything else for weeks. I called my mom immediately. "They're cutting me off," I said as soon as she answered. She sighed. "They're not cutting you off. They're just creating space." "For what?" I asked. So she can control the story without me contradicting it?" "That's not fair," my mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They're saying I'm unstable," I said. "They're implying I'm a risk to the kids. Do you understand how serious that is?" There was a pause. "Megan feels attacked." "I am being attacked," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts. "And everyone keeps telling me to be quiet about it so she doesn't feel worse." My mom didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was softer. "I didn't realize it had gotten this far." "It got this far because no one stopped it early," I said. After we hung up, I sat there shaking, a cold fear settling in. I'd always assumed that being calm, being reasonable, being honest would protect me. I was realizing how naive that was. All it took was the right narrative. I repeated often enough by the right person. That afternoon, I got another message, this time from Megan herself. "We need to talk, in person." Every part of me screamed no, but another part, the one still hoping for some kind of adult resolution, said yes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her house. She arrived late. She looked tired, genuinely tired, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, I almost softened. Then she sat down and said, "I feel like you're trying to destroy my family." I stared at her. "I left your house." "You accused me of abuse," she said. "I described your behavior," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Do you know what happens when people start questioning a mother's mental health?" My chest tightened. "You're the one questioning mine." She waved that away. I was concerned. "You hid my belongings." "I was trying to get you to see how extreme your routine is," she snapped. "You care more about walking than about being present." "That's not true," I said, heat rising in my chest. "And you don't get to decide that." She stared at me for a long moment, then said very calmly, "I think it's best if you stay away from my kids." There it was, plain and unmistakable. I felt dizzy. "Because I take walks." "Because you're unpredictable," she said. "Because you escalate situations. Because you refuse to admit when you're wrong." I laughed, bitter. "You hid my shoes. You insulted my mental health. You told me this is why I'm alone." She shrugged. "People say things when they're stressed. And then they take responsibility," I said. They don't double down and smear someone to protect themselves." Her eyes hardened. "Be careful," she said. "You don't have as much to lose as I do." That sentence chilled me. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I'm done having this conversation." As I walked out, my phone buzzed. A text from my therapist. If the situation escalates to threats regarding access to children or allegations about your mental health, document everything. Save messages, consider a consultation with a lawyer. I sat in my car and stared at that text for a long time. That night, I started a folder. Screenshots, dates, times, exact quotes. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was overreacting, like everyone had been telling me, but another part of me, a quieter, steadier part, knew this was necessary. A few days later, where the real turning point came, I got a call from my job's HR department. They asked if I had a moment to talk. Their tone was neutral, professional. My heart started pounding before they even said anything else. "We received a call expressing concern about your well-being," the woman said gently, "specifically regarding your mental health and potential instability." My vision narrowed. "From who?" "We can't disclose that," she said, "but we're required to check in." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. This wasn't just family gossip anymore. This was crossing into my livelihood. "I have no disciplinary record," I said. "I have a therapist. I have documentation. There is no issue." She reassured me that there was no action being taken, that it was just a wellness check. But after we hung up, I sat there trembling, their rage and fear twisting together in my chest. That was the moment something in me hardened. This wasn't about peace anymore. This was about protecting myself. I forwarded everything to a lawyer recommended by a friend. I didn't know what I wanted yet. A cease and desist. Advice. Validation that I wasn't imagining how serious this had become. When the lawyer called me back, she listened quietly as I explained. When I finished, she said, "You're right to be concerned. This pattern, questioning your mental health, implying risk, contacting third parties, is not accidental." Hearing that from someone objective made my throat tighten. "So, I'm not crazy?" "No," she said. "You're being controlled through implication." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my living room, the weight of it all settling in. I felt grief. Not just for the relationship I'd lost, but for the version of myself who kept trying to fix things by being smaller. I realized then that even if this cost me access to the kids, even if it fractured parts of my family, I couldn't undo what I'd already done. I'd refused to play along, and that apparently was unforgivable. The lawyer advised me not to contact Megan directly anymore. No explanations, no clarifications, no emotional appeals. "Anything you say can be reframed," she told me. "Silence isn't guilt, it's protection." That went against every instinct I had. I'm a talk-it-out person. I believe in misunderstandings, in repair. Sitting on my hands while someone rewrote my character felt unbearable, but I listened. 2 days later, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox. I stood there staring at the envelope like it might bite me. My name typed neatly on the front. A return address I recognized immediately. Inside was a letter from Megan's attorney. It accused me, carefully, vaguely, of harassing behavior, emotional volatility, and boundary violations. It requested that I cease contact with Megan and her children and refrain from making defamatory statements to family members. It said this was not a restraining order, but that further action would be taken if necessary. I read it sitting on the floor by the door. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel shocked. I felt validated in the worst way. This was the escalation my therapist had warned about, the quiet threat wrapped in professional language. I forwarded it to my lawyer. She called me within the hour. "This is posturing," she said. "Nay, they're trying to intimidate you into silence." "It's working," I said, my voice flat. "I know," she replied. "But here's the thing. You haven't done anything wrong, and we have documentation." She asked me to send everything I had. Texts, voicemails, screenshots, the HR call log, my therapist's notes confirming ongoing treatment and stability. It took hours to organize. Each screenshot felt like reopening a wound. Seeing Megan's words lined up chronologically made the pattern impossible to ignore. The gradual shift from passive-aggressive comments to outright character assassination. When I was done, I sat back and felt hollow. That evening, my mom came over again. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. "I got a call from Megan," she said quietly. "She's saying you're threatening her." I laughed. But it came out wrong. "With what?" "She didn't say," my mom admitted. "Just that she's scared." I handed her my phone. "Read." She scrolled through the messages. The ones about me being unstable, the ones about protecting herself, the email from my stepbrother, the letter from the lawyer. Her face changed as she read. Not dramatically. Slowly, like something settling into place that she'd been resisting. "She called your work?" my mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." My mom set the phone down. "I didn't know that." "I know," I said. "No one knew. That's the point." She rubbed her temples. This is more than I thought." "I've been trying to tell you," I said, not accusing, just tired. She looked up at me, eyes wet. "I'm sorry." That apology landed harder than I expected. It didn't fix anything, but it mattered. And the next development came from an unexpected place. A week after the letter, I got a message from my stepbrother's sister, from his mom's side. We weren't close, but we'd always been cordial. "Hey," she wrote. "I don't want to stir things up, but I think you deserve to know something." My stomach clenched. She asked if we could talk on the phone. I said yes. When she called, she sounded nervous. She told me she'd been uncomfortable for a while with how Megan talked about me, but she hadn't wanted to get involved. That changed when Megan started telling people she was worried I might snap and that she was protecting her kids. "She said you had a history," the woman said hesitantly. "What history?" I asked. "She implied you'd had some kind of breakdown before." I felt cold. "That's not true." "I figured," she said quickly. That's why I'm calling. Because she told the same story about another person. Years ago. A friend of hers. Said the friend was unstable, toxic, dangerous around kids. Cut her off completely." My heart started pounding. "What happened?" "She later admitted she'd exaggerated," she said. "Said she felt threatened and needed people on her side." I closed my eyes. "This is a pattern," she continued. "And now she's doing it to you." After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of that revelation pressing down on me. It didn't make me feel victorious. It made me sad and scared, because patterns don't stop unless they're confronted. My lawyer suggested we respond to the letter, not aggressively, but firmly. A denial of allegations, a request that they cease contacting third parties with unsubstantiated claims. Documentation attached? And when the response was sent, the noise stopped. Not immediately, but noticeably. No more messages from random relatives, no more vague posts, no more calls. A week later, my stepbrother emailed me. He said he'd seen the lawyer's response, that things had gotten out of hand, that he wanted to reset. I stared at the email for a long time before replying. I'm open to respectful communication, I wrote, but I won't accept false narratives about my mental health or intentions. If that continues, I won't engage. He didn't respond. A month passed, then two. The silence was its own kind of grief. I missed the kids terribly. I missed the version of family I thought I had. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering where things could have gone differently. If I'd skipped the walks, if I'd laughed off the comments, if I'd stayed quiet. No, but then I'd remember the HR call, the lawyer letter, the way unsafe had been weaponized, and I knew that staying would have cost me more than leaving ever did. One morning, months later, I was out on my walk, same route, same quiet rhythm, when my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. She apologized, it read. Not publicly, but to me. She admitted she went too far. I stopped walking and stood there, the cold air filling my lungs. What does that change? I typed back. I don't know, my mom replied, but I wanted you to know. I stood there for a long time before replying. Thank you, I wrote. I already know who I am. I finished my walk slower than usual, letting the thoughts come and go. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel healed. I felt steady. And for the first time since this started, that felt like enough. About a year passed before things shifted again in any meaningful way. Not dramatically, not with a big apology or some cinematic confrontation, just quietly, the way real life usually does it. I kept my distance. Not just from Megan, but from the family dynamics that had wrapped themselves so tightly around this whole mess. I showed up to holidays selectively. I stopped explaining myself preemptively. I stopped checking group chats that made my chest tighten. I learned slowly and imperfectly that I didn't have to attend every argument I was invited to. My walk stayed. That part never changed. They became something different, though. Less about grounding myself through chaos, more about reminding myself that my body, my time, my mind were still mine. There were days I walked angry, days I walked numb, why days I walked replaying old conversations like they were puzzles I could finally solve if I tried hard enough. Over time, those days grew fewer. I stopped asking what if so often. My therapist once asked me what I thought I'd lost by leaving Megan's house. I said the kids, I said family peace, I said the version of myself who believed being helpful would protect me from being hurt. She nodded and asked what I'd gained. That question sat with me longer. The answer didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. In the way my shoulders dropped when my phone rang and it wasn't family. In the way I stopped flinching when someone joked about therapy or routines. In the way I noticed I no longer felt the need to justify my choices before anyone even asked. About 18 months after everything blew up, my stepbrother reached out again. On this time, not through email or carefully worded texts. He called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice sounded different, quieter, less defensive. I'm not calling to reopen everything, he said quickly. I wanted you to know I see things more clearly now. I didn't respond right away. He told me Megan had started therapy, that some patterns had been pointed out to her that were hard to hear. He didn't ask me to forgive her. He didn't ask me to come back. He just said he was sorry for not stopping things sooner. I should have listened, he said. That mattered. More than I expected. I told him I appreciated the call, that I hoped things were better for them. I didn't promise anything else. A few months after that, my mom invited me to coffee. Not to mediate, not to push reconciliation, just coffee. At one point, Hannah, she said, I wish I believed you faster. I looked at her and said, me too. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. As for Megan, we exist in the same orbit now, distantly. Polite if we're in the same room. Careful, neutral. There was no big reunion with the kids, no sudden restoration of what was lost. Instead, there were small things. A birthday card I was allowed to send. A brief hello at a school event. A cautious, supervised normal. And you know what surprised me most? That I was okay with that. I'd spent so long thinking I had to fight for closeness at any cost. That distance felt like failure. It took time to realize that sometimes distance is the cost of survival. And that's not something to be ashamed of. I'm still single. Megan was right about that part, technically. But the word doesn't sting the way she meant it to. My life is full in quieter ways now. Friends who don't question my sanity because my habits differ from theirs. Mornings that belong entirely to me. A sense of self that doesn't wobble every time someone disapproves. Every so often, someone new hears a softened version of the story and asks, so, was it really about the shoes? I usually smile and say, no, it was about control. But inside, I think something else. It was about the moment I realized that being agreeable was costing me my safety. That being helpful didn't mean being expendable. That love that requires you to disappear isn't love, you can live inside. The last time I saw Megan, she watched me put on my shoes as I was leaving. She didn't comment, didn't joke, didn't roll her eyes. And I realized then that the power had shifted. Not because I won, not because she lost, but because I no longer needed her permission to walk away. I stepped outside, felt the ground under my feet, and went exactly where I intended to go. A few months after that last encounter, something unexpected happened. One of my cousins reached out, one I hadn't heard from at all during the worst of it. She asked if I wanted to grab lunch. No agenda, she said, just to catch up. I hesitated, then agreed. Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted to see who I was now in situations that used to make me tense. We met at a small diner, the kind with chipped mugs and laminated menus. Halfway through our meal, she put her fork down and said, can I ask you something without you thinking I'm judging you? I nodded. Did you ever think about just letting it go? For the kids? The question didn't hit the way it would have a year earlier. I didn't feel defensive. I didn't feel the urge to explain every detail. I just took a sip of water and thought about it. I did, I said. Every day. And then I thought about what staying would have taught them. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? That it's normal for someone to mess with your head if they're stressed, I said. That boundaries are negotiable if someone has more power. That peace matters more than truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. I hadn't thought about it like that. Neither had I at first. That was the strange thing. So much of my clarity came later, long after the adrenaline wore off. Not everyone came around. Some people never did. There are still relatives who keep conversations surface level with me, who believe a vague version of the story where everyone was just overwhelmed and I was sensitive. I let them have it. I don't need to correct every misunderstanding anymore. I've learned that not every silence is surrender. The kids grew older. I saw them less, but when I did, they remembered me. They asked about my walks. One of them even asked if they could come with me someday. I said maybe, smiling because I didn't want to make promises I couldn't keep. But it mattered that they asked. One afternoon, long after the legal tension had cooled, I found myself back on that original 2-mile path near Megan's house. I hadn't planned it. I just ended up there, almost by accident. The trees looked the same. The cracks in the sidewalk were still there. I slowed down, my chest tight, memories crowding in. I thought I'd feel angry, or sad, or vindicated. Instead, I felt distant, like this was a place I used to live emotionally, but didn't anymore. I realized then how much effort I'd spent trying to be seen as reasonable, good, harmless. How exhausting it had been to make myself small enough not to threaten anyone. I'd mistaken endurance for kindness, compliance for love. Walking away didn't make me brave overnight. It didn't magically heal everything. It made things lonely for a while. It fractured relationships I thought were unbreakable. It forced me to sit with discomfort instead of smoothing it over. But it also did something quieter and more important. It taught me that my needs don't have to be dramatic to be valid. That routine doesn't equal rigidity. That calm people can still be deeply harmed. That control often disguises itself as concern. And that being called too much by the wrong person is sometimes proof that you're finally enough for yourself. Every so often, I still doubt myself. Especially when I hear secondhand that Megan tells the story differently now. That she's grown. That things were mutual. That we just didn't mesh. I let those versions exist without fighting them. I don't need to win the narrative anymore. I know what happened. I know how my body felt when I couldn't find my shoes. I know the way my heart raced when HR called. I know the cold clarity of realizing someone was willing to jeopardize my reputation to avoid accountability. I know the relief of stepping into my own space and breathing without being watched. And I know this. If I had stayed, it wouldn't have stopped at the shoes. It would have been my time next, my words, my credibility, all my sense of self. So when people ask me now, usually gently, sometimes skeptically, do you regret leaving? I think about all of it. The guilt, the fallout, the distance, the grief. Then I think about the quiet mornings, the steady rhythm of my feet on pavement, the version of myself who no longer apologizes for existing with needs. And I say, honestly, no. Because the moment I walked out that door wasn't the moment I abandoned anyone. It was the moment I stopped abandoning myself. Years passed after that. Life went on in quiet, uneven waves. Some days heavy with memories, some days almost normal, like nothing had happened. I moved apartments, started a new job, and eventually got into a small community group where people didn't need me to justify myself. People who didn't question whether my routines were too much or my boundaries were rigid. One morning, almost 3 years after the shoe incident, I found myself walking the same loop I'd done at Megan's place that first week. It felt almost sacred now. The cracked sidewalk, the tree that leaned a little over the path, the smell of wet grass in February. I walked slower this time, taking it all in, thinking about who I'd been, who I'd become, and who I wanted to be. I thought about Megan, about the distance that had been forced between us, and about the kids I still saw occasionally. I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Not sharp anger, not the kind that made your stomach twist and your hand shake. It was more like clarity mixed with relief. Relief that I had finally learned that love and help don't require self-erasure. A relief that I had survived being questioned, doubted, and gaslit, and had come out the other side intact. I also realized something else. I could still care about people without letting them control my life. I could set boundaries, protect my peace, and still be present in my own way. I could love quietly, safely, without letting someone else's insecurities dictate my value. That day, I laced up my shoes. Not because anyone told me to, not because it was expected, but because it was mine. I stepped outside, the cold wind on my face, the world waking slowly around me, and I walked. Every step was mine, every breath was mine, every moment was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel small. I felt steady. And I knew I always would. Walking away hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of finally belonging to myself. And that's enough.